All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Summer Fantasy Indie Book Blitz, which I'm going to get the name right out loud at some point. But we are back with another very special featured author interview tonight with Jay Tallsquall, who is a SPIFFO or self published fantasy blog off participant this year, and whose book that you see behind him is first in the popular cover contest voting that went out. Jay, welcome. It's so good to have you here.
I am truly honored to be here. I've watched so many of your interviews. A lot of times I'm lurking because sometimes they happen while I'm actually at work. But I am very honored that you're having me on the show.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for watching. Jay, you have a YouTube channel yourself, so it's just so cool to connect with so many other authors. And Steve is on. Hey Steve.
Hello.
Yes. Hello, everybody who's joining. Feel free to drop comments, questions in the chat. We'll pull them up as we go through. But one of the things that we do special for the one-to-one chats is we actually get to dive deeper into the writing journey and the books. Jay, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started writing and how you ended up putting out uh, your debut right here and doing Spiffo all at once? Not like that's no pressure.
Yeah. So kind of crazy and long drawn out story. So I'm gonna go all the way back to 1987, as I am one of our elder entrants compared to some of the youngsters who are out there. But when I was in high school, I was always had always sort of intended to go into creative writing, journalism, something along those lines. But then when I finally made it to college, uh, just sort of a little bit burnt out. I'd gone to boarding school, so I'd already sort of lived a little bit of the college experience in high school, and just was kind of a little bit burned out with higher education in general. And I remember I went to my dad, who happens to be an engineer, and I was like, "So what is a degree I can get that I don't have to get a master's degree to really go far in a career?" And he was like, "Well, engineering." And my sister's an engineer, and there's a lot of engineers in my extended family, and so a little bit biased. And I'd never a fan of math, but I'd always been good at it, and so jumped into engineering. Kind of left creative writing behind, threw myself wholeheartedly into my engineering career for the next 20 years, all the way up till about 2016. And arriving there, got sort of involved in watching the uh, Critical Role on live TTRPG stuff, and it's like, wow, I really used to love playing D&D way back in high school, back in second edition, and was like, I want to do that. And so in those young days of streaming live TTRPGs, started my channel DMing. That's where most of what's on my YouTube channel is that. But I was one of those crazy people who I had 4 years of notes about my world and the adventure I run there. And one day I added them all up, and I'm like, God, I've got 120,000 words of notes on this world. I should do something with that. And so never really thought that I was going to do a novel, but started to consolidate that. I was going to do a game setting, a TTRPG game setting. And lo and behold, last year in May, came down with shingles and with sort of like the extended version, the equivalent of long shingles, whereas you have neuralgia afterwards. And so even though it had healed, my nerves didn't know it hadn't gone away. And I was going to guest on on a live stream, just go in and do a guest appearance on One Not Gaming just as a player, and started writing the backstory of that. And realized that when I was writing, I stopped thinking about the discomfort I was in. And so this short this backstory, a 3,000 word backstory, turned into a 10,000 word short story that then expanded into a 30,000 word novella, and it finally, through lots of other stuff we'll probably talk about along the way, ended up becoming this book.
Wow. And it's got to be immersive when it's so immersive that you forget your own physical discomfort to do
Yeah.
it. Yes, that's amazing. And I know you're such a champion putting out a book that falls into the LGBTQA category um, right now when the market is desperate for it. How has your experience been doing that indie? Did you try to query it before you brought it indie?
So yeah, I actually never even considered sort of the normal publishing route, and I think it's part of it's because I'm from the privileged place of having a 25-year engineering career. So it was always just sort of a hobby. There was in the back of your mind, you're like, oh well, maybe it'll hit big and someone will pick it up, but was never really looking to query in any sort of way or try to get traditionally published. Truly, I wanted something more permanent than a Google Doc that I shared to my friends or made available on Twitter. And I didn't know anything about self-publishing until I was actually looking up, well, how can I get like 10 copies of something made so I have them for my friends? And lo and behold, for good and bad, fell into Kindle Direct Publishing and was like, oh, wow, this is a thing where they can just make, print to order and we go forward from there. And so that's what I did. And that's how I got here.
Yeah, and the cover, like we said, is gorgeous. I know we were talking about it before we went live. And just honestly, it looks like it could be on any bookstore shelf with any of the trad published books.
I was so lucky in finding Jamie because it was at the last second that, I'm so, at the last second, I was like, oh, I need to have a cover. And, I was looking, going through the little checklist of, KDP, and it was like, oh, cover. And I'm like, oh, cover. And luckily, I had commissioned a lot of art during my D&D run and with all of the gaming that I had done. And I'd always been a big lover of art, even before that, from my cosplaying days of going to cons. I would always loved Artist Alley. So I had lots and lots of artists, but, book cover sort of a different animal. And luckily, I had a couple of my artist friends point me towards Jamie. And, I think I posted in one of my old posts, I'll re-up it so people will look at Twitter and don't have to dig through, of my original concept. And he was amazing working with me to get to something that was actually looked like a book cover and, would have that bookstore shelf sort of feel and appeal. And I love it. So
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your main character in your book. These are always really exciting.
yes. So Talon is my main character, and it is, we go on him with pretty much a life journey. As I had said before, this was sort of just a novella length piece that I was truly thinking about Google Docs and sharing it with a few people that way. And I happened to get in contact with an old friend, someone who I had not visited with in years, and actually an old girlfriend. And she had reached out because her son was wondering about asexuality. And I had at that point was fairly publicly open and advocating for sort of the the entire ace spectrum. And she had lots of questions and had fallen into a lot of pitfalls along the way, as you do. And I started to realize, started sort of churning in the back of my head, people need to understand that there's a lot more to this. And then again, not even a month later, I had a friend who had a friend who was like, hey, I've got a friend who's really struggling with their identity, had been out and identified as gay for years, but was just having a really hard time. And so we started talking and ended up talking for like 4 hours, and the same sort of pathway of there's this very one, celibate, robotic version of asexuality. And that's the only thing that's ace. And it made me realize just how needed some visibility into the ace spectrum was.
Mm.
And so Talon, I'd already been developing sort of as a character, and you're always a little bit in your own character, especially for like a TTRPG if you're going to be improvising and live playing it. And so Talon's journey was very similar to my journey. It takes place over 50 some odd years. Lots of time skips, which I know sometimes is tough for people. But the book's as much about Talon's relationships and these sort of pivotal, foundational relationships that he has through his life. And so, and we spend a lot of time with those people and see how they change and form the person that he is. And, the big thing that I also found in my life, Talon discovers is sometimes you have to walk away from the person you were to become the person who you're going to be. And so with those different pieces, we see that growth in Talon.
So it's breaking the stereotypes. Like, it seems like there's always sort of a stereotype. You've got the flamboyant gay, and you've got the butch lesbians, and then you've got the ace, like you said, who just are completely shut down, and instead shows a much deeper aspect of, that there's a whole spectrum of different types of asexuality, and how that looks in somebody's life trying to figure out where they fall. It's
exactly
really deep. So I know it's got to be very real and raw for you, sharing so much that, like you said, of yourself in this character.
It definitely is. I mean, there's definitely a cathartic piece to it, but there's sometimes where you're like, two of my bosses have picked it up and read it. And it's like, ooh, wow, okay. And then you just kind of are like, you know what? Great. They know more about me. And, that's the thing, especially, Talon is, has a, is a homoaesthetic. So, attracted to other men. So it's a lot of most 3 out of the 4 main relationships are with other men, but then there is another woman who is pivotal in his life. And that first relationship is very much a romance. It is his first love, and head over heels, young love, romantically and sensually attracted to one another. Aesthetically attracted, whatever, but both both asexual, and it's part of what defines his arc is that he found this person, and a little bit of a spoiler, and then lost them, and his life journey is trying to find that again, because it was such this rare magical thing that he felt it his destiny. Feels that it's his destiny for them to end up together.
Wow. So if anybody's wanting to know more about the spoiler, the links for Jay's books are in the description box too. Yeah, down on YouTube. If you're watching on Twitter, you'll have to
the doobly doo.
Follow. Hey, Jay has a Twitter, so if you're watching on Twitter and you don't have access to the description box, just start typing in the search bar Jay Tallsquall. It'll pull right up. So beyond the romantic side of the character too, they've also got that tabletop RPG style story working in here. How did you find the balance of working in romance and life and introspection and adventure all into your book?
It was difficult. It took some great editors and some great beta readers to help me uh, guide the way. Definitely, editing is crucial, both content editing and copy editing. And they are two very different skills that usually take two very different mindsets and different people to do them to be really effective. And so that was hugely, hugely helpful for me. But, you know, I, life, even in our normal world, is an adventure. And so I think, finding the adventurous side of Talon's life was difficult, but also familiar. I mean, we go to I do some pretty deep world building because, as I said, I had 120,000 pages of notes about this world, and we go to basically a dwarven metropolis, and a lot of the feelings and a lot of the adventure that Talon has there is, the equivalent of some of the adventures I had when I was living in Tokyo for my job. I lived in Tokyo for 18 months for my job, and it was this very, being in a very sort of homogeneous culture and society, and that, there is no other metropolis quite like Tokyo. And a lot of those things, again, a lot of me and Talon, a lot of those things that I experienced were easily translatable and then just kind of reskinned with this dwarven overlay. And so it was, not all adventure is necessarily, sword fights and throwing spells at one another, but there's some of that too.
It's awesome. I got to say, I love when I meet somebody who has been to Japan. Part of my family is there. So, I've been to Tokyo many times, and it is definitely, I've also been in New York and Chicago and like Seattle and Portland. And there isn't really another city I've come across that's like Tokyo. It's definitely got its own culture and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
I love that as a narrative hook / the start of his arc. It makes me very curious to see how those desires change as he tries to recover what he lost.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't want to go too much into spoilers, but yeah, I mean, there are decision points where he is reinventing himself, reinventing his life, walking away from where he's been to try to find a new place to be. And there is a decision of, if I'm going to leave this behind, this is the time. I've let this define the first, decades of my life. Do I really want it to define the next decades of my life? And that's part of reinvention. That's part of discovering yourself. It's part of maturing and evolving as a person. Finding out whether you leave behind the things that were the most important to 20-year-old you, or 30-year-old you, or, as I'm discovering now, 40-year-old you.
Yes. So speaking of that, your family is a long line of engineers, you said at the beginning.
Yes.
And so you sort of inherited the engineering gift. But how do they feel about your writing? Do they know you've written and published a novel?
Oh yeah, no, it's I didn't let them know I was writing a novel. I let them know I had written a novel. So once it was done, I basically came out as a novelist.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I mean, everyone was just thrilled and couldn't believe it. A lot of them also were not familiar with self-publishing. They're like, "Oh, I'll run to the bookstore and grab it." I'm like, let me clarify. But still, I mean, most of my family have grabbed copies, or I've given them to them, or have read it or are reading it, or now that the audio book is coming out, listening to it. So
Yeah. Did you narrate your own audiobook?
I did not. I have a a plethora of super talented voice acting friends from the D&D and TTRPG streaming world. And actually, originally I was going to, but I had one of my friends who had read it, loved it, and approached me and asked if they could do it so it would be a part of their portfolio. And so I was
Wow.
like of course. There was a lot of people who had said they were so looking forward to hear me read it. So there was kind of a place where I was like, oh, golly, do I want to do it myself anyway? And Dan sent me a demo, Dan Kaiser, who's doing it. And I listened to the first chapter. I was like, oh, yeah, no, I don't have this level of skill, even remotely this level of skill. And at the time, also, I'm writing book 2. I was like, okay, I'm either going to be buried in recording this and doing 100 million takes for me to get it right, or or I'm going to go ahead and let Dan do it. And I have been just thrilled. It has been amazing to hear my words interpreted by someone with his skill and so professionally done. I mean, there's times where I'm just like, holy cow, he makes what I wrote sound so much better than I ever mentally even heard it in my head. So that's just it's a thrill to experience the book my own book in a new way. It's almost like as we all know, when you proofread, how you read it out loud, so you actually read the words. Hearing it read back, especially from someone else, has just been amazing. I cannot a lot of people, I'm like, even if you don't read the book, go listen to the audiobook because it's so good.
Yeah, and people can buy print copies. I wanted to interject here. They might not be in the bookstore, but you can go over to Amazon and get the hardback, get the paperback, and read it if you prefer to read your books on paper. But
all those links are on my pinned tweet, so you can find them there.
Yes, and those should be in the description too. So grab away if you're watching on YouTube. I think it's really unique being an indie that you get to choose your cover designer, you get to choose your audiobook narrator, you get to bring the world to life. But looking back, now that you have the book out, is there any advice you would have given a younger version of yourself as far as the writing and publishing side goes?
Golly, I think I'm probably still too young to answer that question. Too new to it. I think the biggest one is 2 things. One, believe in your story and that it's worth telling. The biggest thing I would bump into was no one's going to want to listen to this. No one's going to want to hear this. Just the self-doubt. Don't let that stop you from that story that is churning in your head, to get it on paper, to dictate it into a recording, to do it, to continue to discover the story you want to tell. And I would also say, just because I didn't, again, being new to all of this, didn't realize so many people think of self-publishing as a last resort. Look at what you're creating, what you want to create, what you have, the finances, the time, what you need, what you want in return from this. I mean, if you're looking for a career, if you're trying to establish something, still self-publishing might be the way to go for the first couple, from everything I've read. But if you don't get picked up, if you've been querying for a year, for 2 years, whatever, just get your book out there. And I just, there is such a need, especially now with the advent of all the AI and tools and everything else that's flooding the place, for those unique voices to tell their stories. I think it's so important that self-publishing is not the mainstream novel, is not what publishers and agents are going to say is going to be profitable. That that even reviewers are might not necessarily immediately warm up to. Um, Write it for you. Write it for the people you love or the people who you had in mind when you were putting it on paper, and let that be okay for your first, your couple, your career. Um, it's self-publishing is not a dirty word.
Yeah.
And I actually, I think in a lot of ways it's the future of what this industry is going to be. Warehouses full of unsold books is not our future. I just don't think that it is. I don't, print to order is just such a more sound business model. Now, is necessarily Amazon what's going to be the right place and only place, and that's all going to shake out. But the idea of anyone other than the Stephen Kings of the world, to have 100,000 book runs on publishing day, I just don't think that's where we as a industry are going or should be remaining. I mean, just the environmentality of it alone.
Yeah, things are definitely shifting, and it's interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how the AI involvement ends up shaking all of this. But now that you are published, what's your favorite part of being a published author?
Oh golly, talking about my book with people, like I always do. I talk about my book or whatever with friends. The people I have over and sit on the patio and have beers with or whatever. Talking with with you, talking with people on Twitter, having folks say reach out either in DM or even just reading other people's review of, hey, I liked this. This really spoke to me. This is my favorite line. I mean, I just now discovered I'm so terrible that being able to look up people's highlights highlights that things they highlighted in my book on Kindle. I didn't, because I never highlighted anything when I read it. I just kind of just used it as a reader. It was a functionality I never used it. Now it's like, as an author, I can actually see what other people highlighted in my book, and that's crazy to me. I love it.
Yes. Oh, that's one of the best feelings. Besides, having your characters out there. And we've done a lot of for fun questions this week on the blog. And so I'm interested to know who was the most fun character to write and who was the most challenging character for you to write.
Oh, Osmond by far is the most fun character. He is the fan favorite. He's the second relationship in the book that we explore, and is just again fan favorite. I don't want to give much away, but again, world building guy. He is, in my world, is an Uldani, which is a offshoot of elves who tied themselves, instead of the elves in my book are very tied to the static forces of nature, the mountains, the trees, the forests, all of these sort of timeless things, which sort of give them this almost geologic lifespan. This sect of the elves broke off and became the Uldani, tying themselves into the active parts of the world, the elements, volcanoes, geysers, the tides, things like that, which shortened their lifespan, but made their emotions burn especially brightly. Their whole culture is about embracing emotion. I always say they're super fans of life. They love to live boldly and fully, good emotions and bad emotions. So having Osmond be this sort of this, he's not just like a can of soda pop. He's the 2-liter bottle that he dropped Mentos into Talon's life. It was just so much fun. And I really, 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 really enjoyed him. It kind of very much kind of reverse Falcons. They are, like I say, they are super fans of life. And then probably the most challenging. Well, the most challenging is actually a flashback moment, and it is Ramed, and mainly because it was such a personal um, part of my story as well. It was, as you do whenever you're figuring out your identity, it was Talon trying to make a go at not being asexual, and to needed to really know, and met Ramed, who through sort of kindness and their relationship let him make that helped him to make that discovery. But it was a very painful painful realization that both of acceptance and realization that there was this unchangeable part of himself that he was not particularly he was lonely, and he had to face his own identity, which can be hard for characters are people. And so that was probably the hardest, just because it was probably the most raw for me.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, both in the book and here on the live. I think there's just something about seeing an author be so vulnerable in their work that adds so much value to the book versus, the tendency is, hey, this is trending in the market. I'm going to write a whatever type of book it is and throw it out. And it's a good book. It's a good story. But the ones that mean something and that stick with you are the ones where there's those raw, personal, real moments in the book. And yeah, there's nothing that can replace that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I say, tell your story. Don't be afraid of it. Again, being one of the elder statesmen of SPIFBO, you will never regret taking the chance and telling your story like you want to. You just won't. I can tell you. There's a lot of things you will look back on in your life, but being true to yourself and telling your story is not going to be one of them.
So true, and such an important part of the indie journey. On prior panels this weekend, we've heard multiple people tell why they went indie, and one of the ones is content control. And what it really comes down to is the story that you've seen the way that you meant it to be in your head, and giving it permission to exist. And that's a big, big deal. But thank you so much for joining and just chatting with us and sharing about your book. I'm so excited. I have not read your book, but I have made a goal to read the other SPIFBO books by this time next year. So I've read 80 before I came into SPIFBO. And so when I pulled it up and I was going through seeing who our competitors were, that's a self-published fantasy blog off for people who don't know what I'm talking about. Sorry, I should have said that earlier. There are 300 books in this competition that's organized by Mark Lawrence, and those 300 books are split up among 10 blogs, so about 30 each. Of those, the day I saw who was in it, I realized I had read about 80 of the books already, and I was like, I'm in trouble. Because I know that there's a lot of good books.
It has been amazing to see. I would tell you, first thing, humbled by the talent that is in the competition. The fact that I got lucky and just tripped upon it like 2 weeks before the entries were due, and was like, oh, I'll just log in and do my little thing. And then I realized all the people, I'm like, oh my Lord, this is like really real. These are, like, when I was looking at the other books, I'm like, oh my, what am I in? But I mean, it's been amazing, and I can tell you, I've learned so much, just from talking with other folks. But then, has pointed me to so many great books that I would not have read. I've only read about I'm on my fourth right now, of them,
Mm-hmm.
and just have been thrilled with the ones that I have picked up. And, you know, seeing how other people, other indie authors have crafted a story, that is not mainstream, but work so well. And you realize how, in the gaming world, we call it being railroaded, how railroaded stories in mass media have become, because it's the formula.
Mm-hmm.
It's the formula that gets the book off the shelf, but doesn't necessarily open your mind or your creativity or you to ideas that just you don't find anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely stiff competition. I'm looking forward to picking up the other 220 I haven't read yet. I read way more than I probably should because I have a reading addiction. But seriously, I'm going to try. I'm starting with the Bookborn blog and I'm going to take it by blog. I'm just going to try to knock out the ones I haven't seen yet. And I'm excited to get to yours. Very, very excited. So thank you again for joining. Good luck to you. Good luck to Steve. Steve, who's on here, is also participating in Swiftbow this year. So good luck, Steve, and thank you for joining today. If you'd like to meet more indie authors, stay tuned because there are 5 more panels tomorrow, including in the morning and early afternoon, 4 Spiffbo specific live reads where these brave souls are going to read excerpts from their books in panels here on the channel. So stay tuned for that. But thank you so much, Jay. This has been such a pleasure.
Absolutely. I hope we can talk again some other time, maybe after you've read, and we'll get together and do a recap.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.